Three, two, one, we're ready. Go ahead, Russ.
Fractal University, greetings. We are joined today by the founder, creator, the principal, the dean, and headmaster, Dan Winter, discussing the topic today of the Montauk Project. Now, who doesn't know about the Montauk Project? It is alleged that the United States has a series of government projects conducted at Camp Hero or Montauk Air Force Station in Montauk, New York, for the purpose of developing psychological warfare techniques and exotic research, including time travel. So, Dan, give us the juice, the information, the knowledge that the people are waiting so long for that's not out there today.
Well, I'm going to put a little pin here. So just to say that it's true that when I was much younger, I seemed to have the blessing or the coincidence that I got to know so many people involved in these kinds of projects like Puharich, Bentoff, Preston Nichols, Al Felix. I knew all those people incredibly well, actually. Yeah, I mean, very well. What do you say? And I seem to be the Forrest Gump of the consciousness psychotronic generation. I'm not sure what that means. But anyway, since those stories were integral to my original upbringing and education in the psychotronic study of, electronic devices which are psychoactive, which I have been studying all my life from when I was graduate electrical engineering operator of the polygraph in the psychophysiology clinic at the University of Detroit. This was my life. So if I can be of service in trying to make sense of some of these stories and turn them into useful educational lessons, that's why I'm here, and we're here to empower, especially young people, to understand the pure principles which are empowering behind what on the surface look like messy, ugly stories. There is some self-empowerment here. So where do I start? Most of the people that I met, which ended up being intimately connected with the Montauk Project, and I must say, I wasn't there very much myself. No, lived in New York State, but all the people, it seemed like I was rubbing shoulders with every other day. Why? Well, I was an early speaker at the U.S. Psychotronics Association for, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. In fact, my 1987 lecture to the U.S. Psychotronics Association has gone viral 30 years later on my YouTube channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field, talking about being and consciousness. I mean, we were scratching our heads about physics of consciousness for a long time. Anywho, so what does this have to do with Montauk? Remember, the central principle behind what psychotronics called a psychologically active electric circuit, the central principle is embodied in one simple conundrum, messy problem, which was, if you take a simple hunk of wire and touch both ends to your car battery, it's going to blow up and probably kill you. Now, however, if you take that same chunk of wire and wind it into a caduceus, up and down coil, think phase conjugation. I didn't know that a caduceus was phase conjugation till many years later. But if you wind a caduceus and touch the same wire, the same battery, it's going to stay cool. But if you point that at your friend at their solar plexus, they're going to feel nausea. And so there we were for 30 years, and I mean 30 years, scratching our heads. Why? Now I know exactly why. Because if you conjugate that electric field down a caduceus, optimized by golden ratio, that's going to convert the transverse wave to a longitudinal at the point, and you point the longitudinal wave at somebody. You're creating feeling, you're creating gravity, you're creating implosion, you're creating centripetal force. Ultimately, you're making a Stargate. I mean, heck, there's all kinds of gorgeous, powerful, beautiful physics if you really know what a caduceus is, hence Thoth Hermes, who's central behind all these stories. So this was fundamental to all of our conversations. So now in walks, let's talk the first person on this list, Andrea Puharich. Now, Andrea Puharich, I was explaining to Elena Danan the other day how he got to be the first guy that talked to Enki Tom Atun, which became the story of the Nine. Well, how did that happen? Well, Andrea Puharich was studying how you use audio heterodyning in capacitors behind the ears. And if you perfect that heterodyning to be phase conjugate, you suddenly have a bit of clairaudience. Except Puharich didn't call it clairaudience. No, he simply called it, oh, how shall we trigger people's ears so deaf people can hear? But during the time that Andrei Puharich is patenting these circuits to use capacitors to phase couple capacitively entrain the bones near the ear and induce hearing in the deaf. He was expert at this. And the pictures I have, this is all in the slideshow, fractalfield.com/slideshow. You will see the pictures. Anywho, suddenly he's studying clairvoyance, and one day who's making the phone calls to him? This guy named Tom Atun. Atun? Tom. Who was Tom? Oh, turns out that was Enki. And this is where Phyllis Schlemmer, educated by Puharich, teaches what became eventually Deep Space Nine and Star Trek. Started that day, and I was kind of there. Now, again, what does this have to do with Montauk? Well, later, when I did the documentary on how portals work with Elena Danaan, and it went viral, I don't know, 50,000 views, we taught that what a portal is when that implosion phase couples the longitudinal array at the 0 point, and you can embed in that array. For example, when we measured Jean-Charles Moyen repeatedly teleporting with witnesses coming back between sand between his toes, and we know the brainwave signature that did it. It's the same caduceus cascade. So anywho, now, so obviously the universe is kind of preparing me to understand a few things, and maybe we could make this shareable information. So now in walks the next character in our story, who is Preston Nichols. So Preston Nichols walks into psychotronics, and he's got this octahedral, let's see if I can do this now. I should do this right here. He has this octahedral antenna. He's got an octahedral antenna in his hand, and he starts telling Montauk stories. Now, at the time, I did not know that if you interface electric fields in a precise electric cube, which in optics is called four-wave mixing, the way you phase conjugate lasers and make time reversal and negentropy measurably, you start with a tetracube of lasers. Well, if you do that with electric fields, called phase conjugate octahedral antenna, it's called the deca-delta antenna. And there is Preston Nichols, center to the Montauk myth, saying that he can make these very unusual phenomena happen with his deca-delta antenna. And later, Preston Nichols is the center of many and hundreds of Montauk stories. So let me see if we can understand some pure principle here now. Remember, the U.S. military at the time is studying how to make ships invisible to radar. This is the essential problem. And so this relates to the Philadelphia experiment story, which is in some ways a precedent, an antecedent, kind of the beginning of the Montauk story is part of the Philadelphia experiment story. And the Philadelphia experiment story, from an electrical engineering perspective, you got a generator on one side of the boat and the generator on the other side of the boat. They're 180, well, they should be 180 degrees out of phase, but they didn't even learn how to couple them together. Oops. That's why the sailors ended up trapped in the hull when they teleported. But anyway, because Johnny von Neumann, he didn't understand phase conjugate charge collapse. No. And trying to run the Philadelphia experiment and later Montauk, literally, we believe, drove him insane. One of the most famous mathematicians in history, driven insane because they were experimenting with phase conjugate fields. And Tesla told them they would go nuts, and Johnny von Neumann did. That's my understanding of the situation. Maybe I'm guessing in a few places. But anyway, so when you want a ship invisible to radar, you got to implode its field. Eventually, they were just trying to create the perfect 0 point null condition. There would be 0 voltage, 0 magnetic flux density, 0 flux. Because it's obviously a magnetic sensor that bumps into the boat that causes it to blow up from the mine. So if there's no magnetic flux, obviously you're going to, you're invisible not just to radar, but to these mines. Well, if you take the concept of taking a boat's electromagnetic field to a 0 point and to perfection, the perfect 0 point is Planckfire.com. phase conjugation of Planck, exactly, imploding through the Planck threshold to the 0 point, except none of those people, especially von Neumann and Tesla, said, go away, I don't want nothing to do with this, or the US military had the first clue of actually what a portal or Stargate was. They didn't know. They didn't know what embedding was. I mean, these are kids making a mess. In fact, my other friend, William Buehler, he wrote books on this subject of how the Montauk experiments actually created a wrinkle in time where the aura of the Earth got so many holes porous in the aura of the Earth that all these parasites were invited in, hint the Greys, and the Templars had elaborate agendas they called the repair of the fabric of time that started with the mess they made at Montauk. You can read the stories. goldenmean.info/Buehler, Buehler, one of the world's best websites on the history of the Templars, in my humble opinion. Repair of the fabric of time. Now, why did they have to repair the fabric of time? Oh, shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we got a bunch of kids who are real klutzes here. And now let me do another little piece.
Mm-hmm.
So then this lady, Marcia Andriola, who's a wonderful lady, amazing artist, is living at my farm, Crystal Hill in Western New York. And she says, we need to invite my really good friend, Ken Page, multidimensional cellular healing, one of the original Drunvalo aficionados, over to the farm to do this webinar on removing plasma parasites from the aura. Now, how did Ken Page learn how to do that? By helping the Montauk survivors. And that's how they started. Now, why did the Montauk survivors have all kinds of merd in their aura? Well, obviously, you know, so let's understand basically. So Ken Page multidimensional cellular healing, basically they use muscle twitches to have a conversation with the infesting ghost in the aura. And I used to say they were kick butt aura ghost busters, but they said, no, we're not ghostbusters. We remove the ghosts by loving them. That's what they said. And I could tell many of those stories. But the point was that they had used hypnosis to regress many of the Montauk survivors. Remember, the Montauk, we think it was run by a Draco named Charlie, whom this other guy I want to talk about, Michael Ash, knew very well, the chief time empath who steered the time chair at Montauk. Read his story, goldenmean.info/Ash. Michael Ash, the time empath. And why did they call the guy who steered the time chair at Montauk the time empath? I've talked about this many times. Basically, the empath is Nostradamus sucked the future to himself by crying, weeping for those whom he saw. That's called a time empath. Okay, it's the empathy that makes you implosive, and therefore the tornado steerer. And by the way, when they were abducting the teenagers to steer the time chair at Montauk, you can bet they were looking for the lucid dreamers, the people with the soul. Problem is, they didn't know what a soul was. Oh, I think that's a governmental problem. Physicsofsoul.com. Recommend that to your government. Okay. So anyway, they had to find the people with soul, like indigenous people who could lucid dream and steer the time chair. So they had enough coherence in their aura to steer the tornado, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the origin, actually, in detail of the movie Contact, Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster is steering the time chair. It's actually a dodecahedron imploding. And first they think she's time traveling, and then they call it a lucid dream, and then they didn't know the difference. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
So, well, did I finish? I didn't finish the story. So I've touched on the story. So I was living in Atlanta for many years, and Al Bielek was there, and we spent a lot of time together. And I believe Al Bielek's story. I think he's right. And his half brother from another time was Duncan, who was one of the leading characters in the Montauk episode. And Duncan supposedly was in love with my former girlfriend, Susan Ambrose, in Denver. It's a bit of a long story, very complicated. I think Duncan, Roger knows him very well and is a very sincere and noble person. But also, I believe Susan was kind of afraid of him because holes in the aura. Hello. So, but why did the Draco need the teenagers to steer the time chair at Montauk? That's the story to the Maury, because the Draco didn't have a soul, Humpty Dumpty's egg.
So I want to kind of concentrate from the Montauk project and the actual techniques that they were implementing. Number one is they wanted to get the ships to be invisible.
Yeah.
Number two, they wanted to work on the remote viewing. They wanted to work
Yep.
on the quantum physics between how they can use the ethos to their power. And so, for example, myself, I have clear, vivid trainings that were performed on me in terms of using triangulation weaponry in an astral form on dunes, where you have your enemy, and the only way that the actual weaponry can work is not from your physical thought. You have to feel you have to triangulate it, see it, feel it, and then it'll work. Something, this is just layman's terms. And so that's what I'm trying to kind of translate to the people, is what would wake certain people up is this type of energy, to actually, this is what they worked on, this is why they worked on it, and expand from there and kind of dig deep in someone's subconscious how we can translate that energy.
Yes, that is the right question, and a lovely question, actually. So the essential question here is, at what point does the aura contain enough electrical inertia to be measurable, become centripetal, and therefore steer something? And I think there's a fun example here. They always said that the advanced lucid dreamers / remote viewers were aware that Area 51 had alarms to tell them when a remote viewer was present.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm an electrical engineer, a lifetime in psychophysiology. I have an idea how you build an alarm that tells you when a remote viewer is present. Hello. Of course, you
Mm-hmm.
might need to know what longitudinal wave array is and what the centripetal force that holds a longitudinal array together. But when Bill Tiller measured that focused human attention makes electric fields implode, and measured 11 different ways, conscious acts of creation, he was having a clue to the answer to your question, Russ, which is, at what point is your own aura centripetal enough that when you project it externally, you can flip a switch?
Mm-hmm.
So actually, the training you have to embed yourself in an external device leads you to what advanced races have been doing for a million years. The starcraft are steered directly by the aura. They're literally organic. These are the
Mm-hmm.
advanced ones from Aldebaran, by the way. So when
Mm-hmm.
your aura becomes centripetal enough to steer something measurable, it means you're in the process of growing up, and that's wonderful. And if you have to use a military experiment to get there, well,
Well, I mean, some people a little bit more than myself, as I've with years and years of research, I have seen certain people are just, they've blown out their pineal. They're just so worn out from how much they've been experimented on. But let's focus in on the tech, from the car batteries, as you explained, to what experiments were actually done, what and results that came from them.
well, obviously, invisibility was only the beginning. Teleportation was, and they had various time frame remote viewing kinds of mirrors, phase conjugate mirrors. These things started with the coating on Nostradamus's scrying cup, as I've said many times. Variations on the theme of what a phase conjugate mirror is insight to ancestor memory, ancestor phone call, because this is insight to how longitudinal arrays become visible and are prehended. Because the longitudinal component becomes phase locked with the transverse array only at the centripetal nodes, symmetric and embedded and centripetal in that array. So, the obsidian mirror that the Olmec used for ancestor phone calls is an introduction to
So
how you make a
Obsidian
Stargate.
Muse. So
And
Obsidian Muse. What would they do with the kids that have that? Because I mean, for myself, I had 3 or 4 attempts on my kidnappings when I was younger. Um, they were trying to get me for pretty good. I mean, I've
yeah,
had times where I'd
because you
wake
were
up.
psychokinetic, they needed you.
Right, right. I mean, and we'll go into those stories later or in different episodes. But what were they doing with the kids? Would they put them in front of obsidian mirrors, would they give them, what kind of tech would they put in their hands? Would they just have them do breathing techniques and sit in a geometrical aligned, or would they have a hydron collider implode while they're in a and theta and delta, and then that window would open and they try to connect with it to try to open some type of realm? What would be the
Yeah.
actual steering?
And they damaged a lot of people. But if you visualize, the time chair is essentially an implosive capacitor. And one example of an implosive capacitor is the deca-delta antenna from Preston Nichols, which is obviously a phase conjugate array. And if you use an RF phase conjugate series, radio frequency implosive, high voltage capacitance, there's many ways to make implosion, but the broader the spectra, the bigger the Stargate, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whoever's sitting in the center and wants to steer slash see has got to have a soul, because and the Draco couldn't do it, because this is what I think is hilarious about this Draco named Charlie, who was part of the Greys and the Nebu, who were running America at the time. Oh, yeah, bad news, Eisenhower. Oops. Well, I don't want to pick on Laura. I'm not. What I'm saying is, though, they made the treaty with the Greys, and they were run by the Draco. Sorry, abducted millions, not thousands, millions, and including the teenagers at Montauk. And what they were looking for was Humpty Dumpty's egg. Could not get a soul. Lucid dreamers. Majority of the abducted ones had some indigenous blood. Guess why? 100 lifetimes on the same song line, and you suddenly get a soul because you embed in the array. Enough grounding, you could get there too. Anywho, so those teenagers were used, and I do mean used and abused. Absolutely. It was horrible, disastrous. And many of today's SSP experiencers remember parts of Montauk. I admire Tony Rodriguez, for example. But the Montauk boys then needed profound hypnotic therapy, Ken Page, for years afterwards, after that abuse, because these Dracos, man. But the funny thing is, the Dracos themselves admitted they lost long-term memory. Hint, that means soul.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
why did they need the human teen? So I think in one way, it's cool that they needed human teenagers, because they didn't have literally the soul to do it. Because that's what enables you to inhabit the center of a tornado and remain centripetal as you inhabit that lightning bolt. It's very similar to the physics of what enables you to crackle as you start steering in a lucid dream.
Then in that form, I would like to add in, so within, so without. So in this cycle of life that everybody is seeing, you don't put past judgment on whatever actions that have happened, but these reptilian beings and Dracos, no matter what, always remember that all the chess pieces go in the same box. So at the end of the day, this duality that we're perceiving and creating, they don't have the same level of emotion. And how I was told, it was we're like this body type, this DNA genetic is like the new kids on the block. It means that we're able to create so much. One moment we're happy, one moment we're sad. It's creating such a rainbow or such a difference in color that we are able to project, that is the interesting part. And so these beings, even though they are like maybe puppy dogs, or maybe some are a little bit lower in vibration, they have this want to live just like any type of process and bliss in the life of your tree of life, your creation. And so they are looking for where can we conjugate, where can we create that spark that will give us that peace of mind. That's I think that's from every type of civilization to any person. That's from lower to higher beings, is that's the goal.
It's a beautiful lesson in a way. What you're saying is, well, you attracted parasites because you didn't follow your bliss. And if you had followed your bliss, you'd have been implosive, and that would have toasted the parasites. That's one way of saying it's appropriate. You could also say, even parasites need love.
Right,
Or you're going to say
right.
your parasites are your best teachers. There's 100 ways to apologize for Dracos, but in the end, still messy.
Yeah,
No, but you're
yeah,
right. And that's why, Ken Page was so emphatic to me. He says, no, 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 we're not kicking the hell out of the parasites in the aura. No, we're loving them and embedding and teaching them how to implode and find their way home to implosive unity, et cetera, et cetera. So it ultimately it is the size of your compassion. Yeah, you're quite point well taken.
yes. And actually, with what you just said is the love. It's something that, it took me until I was 24 because I was experimented on so much and just terrorized by we'll say some beings, one being Enlil. I was being I couldn't sleep without the lights off. I mean, I had times where my mattress would lift up a meter off the ground. I'm in California reading a book for tomorrow's lessons in school, and my mattress lifts up off the ground a meter and starts shaking. And I'm thinking, and then slams down. And I'm thinking, okay, that was an earthquake. I'm crazy. That was an earthquake. That stuff doesn't happen. And then I run out to hear my stepfather snoring, which then I was like, okay, what was that? And so these types of experiences kind of forced me to kind of look outside the box and try to get what does it mean to love and open that portal of love. And then when I realized love is more than just it encompasses so many different types of emotions and feelings, that form of love can open that portal. Your actual thought is opening that portal from a little portal to a big one. It's it's the concentration levels, and that's what they're taking away with the phones and the internet. And so the point of what I'm saying right now is that when I get into certain, because I've traveled this whole world, I've from the war in Ukraine to just being in different castles and abandoned houses, you feel these energies and these beings. And so I was afraid till one point because I couldn't sleep with the lights off because I thought what I saw it made me more comfortable on a subconscious level. But then later I thought, I don't need to even use my eyes. I just use my intuition, use what I have been given, and then from there interact with them on a level of love where that is a dimension which I will put as there's a second level, third floor, 3D, 4D, 5D. If they're on 3D and have all this hate, but I'm on 4D with all this love, they're just going to be spitting at the roof, at the ceiling. They're not going to be able to touch me. So what do I do with that? Then I clear it with that love. I will encompass that love, and I will mentally translate that it's okay. It's okay, brother. No matter how much anger and hate was encompassed in your ending of that moment, I'm going to love you no matter how you are. And that opens a spark that releases them from that property.
Mm-hmm. Oh, beautiful story. In a way, it makes me think of something I was meditating the other day that, Korotkov and Kozyrev proved that if you're sitting at a magnetic line cross and close your eyes, telepathy is much better. Now, the ability to embed in that array, if you can then feel who is inhabiting that array and feel that they're part of you, literally empathy, as you're saying, that
Mm-hmm.
their inertia then becomes permissive to you. Whereas if you resist, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
electrically resistance generates heat, which is called fear is the mind killer.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, so if you're able to see the bigger picture, and what we mean by bigger picture here is specifically what you mean by next dimension, that the more the axes of spin symmetry are superposed, the more harmonic inclusiveness becomes broad spectra, and the array gets bigger. And by the way, those harmonic ratios of the superposed spins ultimately has to be golden ratio or conjugate. That's how you get to the next dimensions, which is the bigger arrays. You embed and then you embed in the embed. And so the physics of love and empathy, which gives you leverage in the array, is what enables you again to be centripetal in the tornado. So back to Montauk, now we're realizing that the human condition was being used by the humans were being used by parasites at that time, the Greys and the Dracos, to learn to steer time travel devices, lucid dreaming devices, and actually remote viewing devices, because we had something the parasite ETs did not have. We call it soul, but actually it's literally the ability to embed and have empathy, which is to feel outside as if it was inside.
So with Montauk, so remote viewing, they try to use time travel experiments, which also would be the Philadelphia experiment, a branch off that. Is
Many of
there
them.
anything else that would be notable that you feel to mention?
Well, obviously, this was regarded as a military tool at the time. So intelligence gathering, remote viewing, time travel. And they, Preston talks about, oh no, who was it? Andrew Basiago talks about going back to the death of Lincoln many times, and it was slightly different every time. But the
Mhm.
physics of time travel is related to this concept that you cannot do time reversal in physics unless you're moving toward increased order. And actually, many of the people who have used portals in these time travel devices report fractionation of the aura, literally weakening of soul. And so it takes a very evolved being to be able to embed in the array, close your eyes and see into the array, just like you're waking up inside a lucid dream, literally inception. And that
Mhm.
skill eventually is the ability to time travel and use portals without scrambling your aura and scrambling your soul. And we actually believe people like Swaru, Gosha, actually became Borg because of too much experiments in time travel. So there's many, many astral hygiene issues here, and we can't deal with them all today, obviously. But just to say that once we begin to understand that coherence you make when you learn how to consciously embed yourself and the dream becomes lucid, is a tool that will not only introduce you to portals and time travel, but it's exactly the skill for taking memory through death and what you're calling ascension.
hmm That's something right now, which I think we'll start getting into in terms of interfacing with the matrix, because this is something that I've been, I feel I've been built for is it translating that interface with thy matrix from when they were teaching me time travel, it would basically be I'd wake up everything would be kind of blurry, but I'd be in a bubble. I'd be in a bubble, and a master would have to come into that bubble and help me feel what I'm steering. And I remember I asked this question. I was like, "Where are we going?" Like I knew we were traveling through time, but where are we going? And he said, "We're not going anywhere. This is your consciousness right now powering this. I'm just focusing it for you." And then from there, right when I realized that, boom, we stopped, and then we were in this like the medieval ages, and I was like, okay, let's do this again. And then that was the how they were training me in that form. So
Mm.
that was so I wasn't and it took me years to really realize, like, okay, so I'm not really going anywhere. It's inside me. I'm fixing my frequency, honing in on that frequency, and that's what's appearing. So I'm
Mhm.
not really I'm not thinking of it as a physical step. It's not a physical move. It's the same thing with ayahuasca or any type of those when they change your neurological connections. You don't move your arms the same. So that's the same thing with the consciousness. It's more of how sure and positive you are in your or how determined you are in your focus. It's not actually making a physical movement as A to B. It's
Yeah, and it's interesting that at Philadelphia, at least Bill Donovan, Elizabeth always used to say, "Well, the sailors at Philadelphia who showed up at a particular bar next to the harbor when they were ported during the Phil, they all went to the same bar, which is where they were dreaming of going on their leave the following weekend. So it was their yearning which steered their travel inside
Mhm.
them or outside." But this is a big subject. What we want to leave you with here today is simply the ideas of astral hygiene, the ideas learning the coherence of your aura to implode and enter the stillness. And in the centripetal center of that stillness, you embed into an array and you get leverage to inhabit that tornado, embed in the array and remain lucid in the dream, which is actually it's a big coherent dream out there. So
Mhm.
there is a happily ever after here, which are lessons for the ensoulment of humanity. That's what I would say, perhaps in closing. What do you think?
I think that's beautiful, and thank you very much. And I think we'll expand a little bit more episode to episode about more details that could fill in somebody's yearning for more knowledge and how to interface with this matrix that we are creating, co-creating all together right now. So thank you, Dan. Mwah. That was beautiful.
Remember, the frequencies that trigger lucid dreaming in the literature correspond to the equation plongfire.com, which is what they should have used at Philadelphia and Montauk if they wanted to implode into that array. Now we know so much more about the physics these days. It's really empowering. So
Mhm.
thank you, Russ. Thank you for your
Love.
blessings.
Everybody, Fractal University, take care. Mwah.
Bye-bye. Bye.